Hi all, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and as part of my B-Tier guides for Dragon Age Origins, I'm bringing you a build guide for an Ice Mage. This was requested by a longtime viewer of the channel purplevaporgod, and I thought it was a fun idea to somehow create a build focused around ice spells, because there's just 4 of them. This will be a 1 specialization build using the Arcane Warrior without actually equipping non-mage weapons or armor unless you want to. For your second specialization, you'll be able to choose whatever you want, just for the unlock bonuses, but you don't have to spend any points into it. Before we get into the build, I have a few mods I recommend, mostly related to bug fixes and quality of life features. Feel free to skip this section if you've already watched my previous DAO guides. Dane's fixes many bugs related to combat and implements missing item properties. It has extra quality of life improvements and balance adjustments too, but it's completely modular, so you can copy what you want and ignore everything else. If you use Dane's fixes, I also recommend more detailed tooltips because it adds detailed descriptions for all abilities and item properties. Advanced Tactics fixes the issues with follower AI and implements more options to choose from in the tactics menu. However, this also changes other things which aren't really bugs in the base game, such as making kills performed by NPCs to grant you XP. Unfortunately, unlike Dane's fixes, this isn't modular, so if you have issues with some of the changes made by this mod, the only thing you can do is choose not to use it. Respecification DAO lets you respecialize your characters. The most important reason you'd want this is if you want to respecialize your companions to try out a different build for them, remove some abilities that you don't like using, like for example Morrigan's bad shapeshifter spells. You could also want to respecialize your own character if your current build isn't enjoyable, or if it's too weak and you're struggling to progress. It's far better to be able to respec than have to restart the entire game, so I always recommend having this as an option. I also play with the No Starting Abilities mod, which allows you to manually allocate all skill and ability points for your Warden at the start of the game. It lets you start with whatever you want regardless of origin, though of course you could also just respecialize your Warden after character creation if you have Respecification DAO. Finally, I will mention the Circle Traveling Robes mod by Shanama, which replaces some of the basic mage robe models with some more practical looking ones with pants inspired by a model from Inquisition. Some mages outside the tower, such as in Ostagar, will use these robes, and the mod also scatters a few to be found by the player in containers so that you can find them naturally while playing. I love the look of these more practical combat robes, and the stats on them aren't too powerful, so I highly recommend it for visual variety and immersion. With that out of the way, let's get into the Ice Mage build. Let's talk about starting attributes. Your character's race grants different attribute bonuses, and you can choose between an elf and human mage for your Warden. Elves have +2 to magic and willpower, whereas humans have +1 to strength, dexterity, magic, and constitution. Elves are the much better choice mechanically, since magic and willpower are exactly the 2 attributes you want, but starting bonuses are tiny overall, so play as whichever race you prefer. The starting attributes I recommend are 20 magic, 15 willpower, and optionally 12 cunning for some skills. Magic is the most important attribute for a mage because it unlocks higher tier spells and increases your spell power, which makes your spells deal more damage and have stronger effects. Willpower adds 5 mana per point, which is a very small amount, but nonetheless it's important to have a larger mana pool so you can cast spells comfortably without having to constantly chug lyrium potions, which is not only annoying but also unrealistic. As an elf mage, you'll already have 16 willpower due to the racial bonus, so no need to spend any extra points there, but as a human, spending 1 point into willpower is a good idea. Cunning is optional because it's just a requirement for some skills, coercion, which allows you to persuade and intimidate characters in dialogue, survival, which mainly grants nature resistance and the ability to see enemies on the map, stealing, which lets you steal from NPCs, but which is best left to rogues, I'll explain later in the skills section, and combat tactics, which adds more tactic slots to set up your character's automated behavior. It depends on whether you want to invest into any of these skills or not, but if you do, don't worry, losing out on a few attribute points by getting up to 16 cunning doesn't make a noticeable difference. For starting skills, technically speaking, mages don't really need any skill to be good in combat, unlike warriors and rogues who need combat training in order to unlock weapon talents. However, a couple of skills are still useful. Combat training is great because it allows your mage to take more damage from enemies before their spellcasting is interrupted. This matters far more a bit later on in the game when you will cast some spells that have a longer conjuration time, but it will be nice to have. You don't need to get this from level 1. Coercion is nice if you want to be able to get some extra rewards and convince people to side with you, sometimes being able to avoid combat. If you don't care about the extra quest rewards and options in quests and dialogue, feel free to skip it. Herbalism is decent because you can craft useful potions with it. I generally have at least rank 1 on one of my characters so that I can craft cheap lesser health poultices and lesser lyrium potions. Morrigan and Wynn starts with 2 ranks in it, so no need to get it on your Warden. If you're playing the vanilla game without the No Starting Abilities mod, your Warden will have Herbalism and Combat Tactics unlocked by default. They're alright, but unless you want to kick out Morrigan and not recruit Wynn, you'll already have companions with Herbalism, and if you're going to manually control your mage, then you don't need the extra tactic slots from Combat Tactics. My recommendation is 2 ranks of combat training and 1 point in coercion. Other than the spellcasting interruption resistance, the second rank of combat training also grants you a plus 0.5 mana regeneration bonus, which is very useful even early on, but more so if you want to use a sustained ability with a penalty to mana regen. Even without using such an ability, mana regen makes longer fights more comfortable since it allows you to use less lyrium potions. For starting abilities, here's what you should have: Arcane Bolt, Winter's Grasp, and Heal. Arcane Bolt shoots a bolt of spirit damage at an enemy. It's very cheap, has a long range, and spirit is a great element that few enemies have resistances to, so it's always good to have on a mage no matter their build. Winter's Grasp deals cold damage to a target and has a chance to freeze it. This is one of the main spells of our Ice Mage, obviously. It's incredibly useful all game, but especially early on since you will almost always be able to freeze non-boss enemies. Heal restores the health of an ally within range for a moderate amount. You can also target allied NPCs with this, so it makes keeping the militia alive in Redcliffe easier. In terms of starting gear, I will just mention the highlights of the gear a Circle Mage Warden can obtain during their origin story. If you're playing with a mod that lets you play as a mage with a different origin, or want to respecialize one of your companions into this build, then you will have to figure out whether their starting gear is good or not, and where it can be improved. After completing the Harrowing, you will get the Mage Robes, a Magic Staff, and the Ring of Study. The Mage Robes grant +1 magic and willpower, which is okay early, but replace them when you find better robes such as the Traveling ones from Shanama's mod. The basic Circle Traveling robes grant +1 willpower, +1 magic, and +3 defense. A tiny improvement, but an improvement nonetheless. The Magic Staff is a tier 1 physical damage staff that grants +1 magic. It's fine since physical damage from staffs isn't resisted, but you'll want to upgrade this soon. Ring of Study is a ring that grants +1 magic. Better than nothing, but obviously weak. In the infested storerooms you can explore if you talk to Senior Enchanter Leora, you can find the Fade Strider boots, mage-restricted light boots that grant +1 magic. These are the only boots in the entire game that give you an offensive bonus for mages. No other boots have such bonuses, so if you don't care about defenses, the Fade Striders are in fact the best boots for this build. You will also have a pair of basic leather boots when you start the origin, which I recommend taking off because they grant fatigue, increasing your mana costs, and you don't really care much about armor. In the Circle's basement and repository, you can find the Blackened Heartwood Staff and some random mage treasure. The Blackened Heartwood Staff is a tier 1 nature damage staff with +2 damage and +2 spell power. For raw damage, this is way better than your starting staff. However, because it deals nature damage with its attacks, it's useless against many enemies that are immune or highly resistant to nature. So keep your magic staff on hand if you see you don't deal any damage with this, or deal a too small amount. In order to keep this staff, you will need rank 1 of the Coercion skill to lie to Irving at the end of the origin story. The best kind of items you can get as random loot from the tower are lyrium potions, novice and journeyman weapon runes, and the Acolyte Staff. Acolyte Staff is a tier 1 physical staff that grants +2 spell power. It's better than the magic staff you get from Irving because it increases your spell power by 2 compared to just 1. The Mage Origin has decent starting gear, but of course, mages are already very powerful due to the nature of spells, so equipment doesn't matter that much. You can get good bonuses especially to magic, spell power, and mana, but not from your starting items. Moving on, here are the recommended attributes. Magic is the most important due to increasing the damage and effectiveness of your spells and also unlocking higher tier spells. You want this as high as it can go, but that doesn't mean spending all your points into it. If you do, you will end up with a tiny mana pool, and your max health will be so low that a strong wind will knock you unconscious. Willpower and Constitution are important too. If you follow my recommendations, you should get to somewhere around 60 base magic by the time you reach level 20, which is a very solid base that you'll add more to with bonuses from gear and passives. Willpower should have a base score between 25 and 35 depending on how many other bonuses to willpower and mana you get from gear. I like having a bigger mana pool because it's immersion breaking to chug lyrium potions one after another. Of course, if you're fine with consuming a ton of lyrium potions in combat, you can have a lower willpower score, around 20 to 25, and put more points into magic instead. For Constitution, you only need a handful of points to get you up to a base of 15 to 18. Constitution increases your health by 5 per point and also increases your physical resistance. If you don't put any points into Constitution, your mage will be extremely squishy and might die before you get a chance to use a health poultice. So I highly recommend spending 1 point into Constitution every few level ups. Even if you have a tank protecting your party, your mage can still get hit by an AoE ability or a sneaky enemy that managed to get past the tank. Better safe than sorry. Finally, Cunning is the only attribute you may want to spend a few points into, more specifically up to a base score of 16 to be able to max out the skills that require it. Here are the recommended skills. Max out your Coercion skill on your Warden if you want to be able to solve a bunch of quests by convincing people to do things your way or to give you extra rewards. You can max out Combat Training if you want, but you're only getting some extra protection against having your spells interrupted and tiny bonuses to combat stats you don't care about. Only rank 2 gives you something useful with a mana regen. The extra interruption resistance is nice though, so if you have nothing else to spend your skill points on, this is always a solid option. Survival is decent for the defensive bonuses of nature resistance and a tiny bit of physical resistance from the final rank, but this is a far better combat bonus on melee characters. The additional effect of seeing enemies on the map is neat, but you only need to have this skill on one of your active party members, so you can max it out on a warrior. The only other potential benefit of survival is that it lets you solve the Alora's Hala side quest the correct way if you have rank 2 of survival on your warden or an active party member. Stealing is a skill I don't recommend on anyone who isn't a rogue, because it scales with your character's cunning score. While maxing it out gives you a decent chance to steal from normal and potentially some elite NPCs, you will not really be able to steal from boss rank characters who have the most chances to give you high value items. Unless you're doing something funky like a stealing challenge run, leave this for the rogues, and even in a challenge, once you recruit a rogue, stop trying to steal with your mage and let the rogue do it. Moving on to the recommended abilities. I will recommend the most important spells that fit with this ice build, enough for a character who will reach around level 20 by the end of the game. The max level is 25, and you can get a few extra spell points as quest rewards and from tomes of arcane technique, so I'll also provide a few optional spells you can unlock if you have the extra points. From the primal tree, max out the ice row and get the first 2 earth spells. Frost Weapons is a weapon enchantment that enhances the damage of all melee weapons in your party, your dog and shale included, with extra cold damage. Cone of Cold damages enemies in a cone in front of you with cold damage and has a chance to freeze them. This spell is extremely useful if you have a large amount of melee enemies you need to CC so that they don't overwhelm you. Blizzard summons an ice storm that deals continuous cold damage to everyone in the area and slows their movement speed, with a possibility to freeze or slip and be knocked down. Creatures in the area also get a defense and fire resistance bonus since they are harder to hit due to the storm, and obviously ice protects against fire. Rock Armor is a sustained spell that increases the caster's armor, scaling with spell power. You don't really need defensive bonuses on this mage for the most part, although armor protects you against physical damage, so it's useful if you're moving close to enemies to cast something like Cone of Cold or Mind Blast. But you mainly want to unlock this to get access to Stonefist. Stonefist hurls a projectile at a target, it has a chance to knock the target down, and it can also shatter enemies that have been petrified or frozen. The shatter effect is what you want it for, since you'll be freezing enemies often. From the creation tree, you want Glyph of Paralysis and Spell Wisp. Glyph of Paralysis is inscribed on the ground, or can be cast directly where an enemy is standing, and paralyzes the first enemy that crosses its perimeter for up to 10 seconds depending on enemy rank, unless the opponent passes a physical resistance check against the caster's spell power. For some reason, Glyphs of Paralysis are considered traps, and can thus be disarmed by rogues in your party. For the same reason, they can still affect a character even if they have 100% spell resistance. It can hit multiple enemies at once if you cast it over an area with enemies already in it. This spell is part of the Paralysis Explosion combo, which is created by casting both Glyph of Paralysis and Glyph of Repulsion, but I personally just prefer to use it on its own because the Paralysis Explosion will affect everyone in the area, including your own party members. Spell Wisp is a sustained spell that grants the caster a small bonus to spell power as long as it's active. Bonuses to spell power are always great, but it's not a huge buff, so I recommend unlocking it later on since your base spell power will be higher due to your magic attribute being higher. It also takes into account the spell power bonuses your character has on their equipment when you activate it, so it becomes even stronger if you have equipment with lots of spell power. From the Spirit Tree, unlock the final row: Mind Blast, Force Field, Telekinetic Weapons, and Crushing Prison. Mind Blast projects a wave of telekinetic force around the caster that stuns enemies nearby. Generally useful as a defensive spell if enemies are attacking your mage and melee, but can also be used offensively to help your allies by walking up to a group of enemies and stunning them. Force Field erects a telekinetic barrier around the target, who becomes completely immune to damage for the duration of the spell, but is also immobilized. Friendly fire is possible, and it's actually great to cast this on your allies when they are affected by a nasty enemy ability, such as the Curse of Mortality spell, an Ogre's Grab, Overwhelm, or being tossed around by a dragon. You can also dispel Crushing Prison from an ally with Force Field, but this creates the Shockwave spell combo, which damages and knocks down everyone nearby, including allies, so I don't recommend it. Another good way to use this is to temporarily disable a powerful boss rank enemy so you can kill its minions first. Telekinetic Weapons is a weapon enchantment that grants an armor penetration bonus to all the melee weapons in the party, including dog and shale. If a character is dual wielding, the bonus is added twice, once for each hand. Not super great since most enemies have low armor, but if you're fighting enemies resistant to cold damage, you can temporarily switch to this instead of frost weapons. Crushing Prison encloses the target in a collapsing cage of telekinetic force, immobilizing them and dealing spirit damage for the duration. In the vanilla version, it can't immobilize bosses, but if you have one of the balance/mechanics tweaks from Dane's fixes, it will have the chance to do so, as it's strange that only Crushing Prison can't affect bosses, while other arguably stronger disabling spells can. From the entropy tree, unlock Weakness and Paralyze. Weakness inflicts penalties of -10 to the attack and defense of a target, as well as possibly reducing its movement speed unless it passes a physical resistance check. It's not a bad spell early, but it falls off later on as the -10 to only one target isn't as meaningful. Paralyze saps a target's energy, paralyzing it for a duration unless it passes a physical resistance check, in which case its movement speed is reduced instead. This is one of the best spells in the game since disabling enemies is super powerful. You already have Glyph of Paralysis, but in my opinion, you can never have enough disabling abilities. From the Arcane Tree, you can unlock the rest of it, but since the abilities here aren't crucial, I recommend leaving them for later in the game. Arcane Shield is a sustained spell that increases your defense, which this build doesn't care about since you are mostly staying at a distance and your tank is protecting you. Rock Armor is far better in terms of damage mitigation for when you cast a short-range spell, so I wouldn't bother using this. Staff Focus is a passive that increases the damage of your staff attacks by 33%. While you spend most of your time casting spells, extra damage for your attacks is never bad. Arcane Mastery is a passive that grants +5 spell power. A great passive for any mage, of course, since it increases the damage and effectiveness of most spells, plus the damage of your staff attacks, but since it's at the end of the row, don't worry about it and just pick it up later. You'll have plenty of spell power from leveling up your magic attribute and getting bonuses on gear. When it comes to specializations, this build is a bit weird in the sense that it unlocks the Arcane Warrior, but doesn't actually make use of the passive ability that combat magic provides. You don't need to equip any weapons or armor with strength requirements. If you want to equip something like a better helmet or boots, of course go ahead. I mentioned a couple of them in the gear section, but you don't need to. The reason we're getting Arcane Warrior is because the combat magic sustained can buff your mage even if you're just a staff-wielding, robe-wearing kind of character. Get all 4 abilities from this specialization: Combat Magic, Aura of Might, Shimmering Shield, and Fade Shroud. Combat Magic grants the ability to use magic instead of strength to satisfy gear requirements. But the reason we want it is that it's also a sustained mode that gives you certain buffs. On its own, it just gives you an attack bonus, which you don't care about because staff attacks automatically hit. However, once you upgrade it with Aura of Might, you will want to have this active constantly because it'll also give you +5 damage and +10 defense. That damage buff is really good. When upgraded with Fade Shroud, it also grants +25% dodge chance and +1 mana regen, so it's very powerful indeed. Honestly, I think people have slept on the Arcane Warrior specialization on their classic mages for too long, opting instead to just unlock Blood Mage and Spirit Healer for the spell power bonuses. But a fully upgraded combat magic gives you so much power as a battle mage. Aura of Might upgrades combat magic, adding +5 damage, +5 attack, and +10 defense while combat magic is active. Obviously, the attack bonus doesn't matter, but +5 damage on each of your attacks is huge, and the defense bonus is nothing to scoff at either. It's available at level 12, and I absolutely recommend unlocking it right away for that damage bonus. Shimmering Shield is a sustained spell that grants a ton of defensive bonuses to the mage, armor, max elemental resistances, and huge physical and mental resistances. However, it has a mana regen penalty of -10, and you don't care about being a tank with this build, so you're just unlocking it to get to Fade Shroud. Fade Shroud upgrades combat magic further, granting +25% dodge chance and +1 mana regen to the mage while combat magic is active. This is available at level 16, and while the dodge chance and mana regen buffs are good, you don't necessarily have to unlock it right away if you would rather focus on more offensive spells instead. For your second specialization, you can unlock whichever one you want for the unlock bonuses. The best ones are Blood Mage and Spirit Healer, which both grant +2 spell power. Blood Mage also grants +2 Constitution, whereas Spirit Healer grants +0.25 combat health regen, which is less useful. However, my personal recommendation is the Spirit Healer because the group heal and revival spells are great to have as options. If you import your Warden Ice Mage into Awakening, then choose the Battle Mage specialization there. It has the Hand of Winter spell, an extra source of AoE cold damage around your character, plus it has a sustained spell that grants bonuses to all your elemental damage, which reduces the need for such bonuses on gear. Keep in mind, though, that the elemental damage bonus cap in Awakening is +50% compared to the 30% from Origins. Here are the optional spells that are good for the build. Miasma is a sustained spell that radiates an aura of weakness around the caster, which grants penalties of -10 to the attack and defense of nearby enemies, as well as a movement speed penalty unless they pass a physical resistance check. You won't necessarily be very close to enemies most of the time, but when you are, this is a powerful debuff. Mass Paralysis paralyzes all hostile targets in the area for a short time unless they pass a physical resistance check, in which case their movement speed is reduced instead. It takes longer to cast than Glyph of Paralysis though, so I'd only use this if Glyph of Paralysis is on cooldown. If you choose Spirit Healer as your second specialization, you could unlock Group Heal and Revival. Group Heal is a party-wide healing spell that restores quite a large amount of healing to all your party members. Revival resurrects allies in a small sphere AoE so that they can rejoin the fight. This spell does have a cooldown of 2 minutes, so it's likely you won't be able to cast it multiple times throughout a fight. Keep in mind the resurrected allies will have low HP, so heal them immediately after the resurrection. They will also have an injury, which will need to be removed with either an injury kit or traveling to the party camp or a safe area. Moving on to recommended gear. The main bonuses you want on gear are magic, spell power, willpower, mana, and bonuses to cold and spirit damage. Optionally, you can also get bonuses to mana regeneration, but since you aren't using any spells with a mana regen penalty, you can leave the mana/stamina regeneration bonuses for other characters who need them. You don't really care about defensive stats since you are not a mage who goes in the front line often, and even then you already have defensive buffs you can get from rock armor, combat magic, and potentially arcane shield. Cold damage and spirit damage are the main two damage types your mage is using with their spells, other than Stonefist, which deals physical damage. The maximum bonus for elemental damage is plus 30%, so try not to get more than the maximum. It's okay if you don't quite reach the cap, even just plus 15 to 20% is fine. Now that you know what to look for, I'll give you my personal item recommendations. The best staffs for this build have bigger bonuses to spell power. As a secondary focus, you can try to get cold or spirit damage buffs, but the spell power is far more important. Keep in mind that each staff deals a certain damage type with its auto attacks. While you may be tempted to choose a cold staff for your ice mage, all undead are highly resistant to cold damage, and some undead, such as revenants, are immune. Ideally, you either want your main staff to deal a damage type that no one is immune to, such as physical, or else you can have two staffs of different elements to switch between, such as cold plus fire or cold plus physical. Final reason is a tier 6 physical staff with plus 3 damage, plus 10 spell power, and plus 15% fire damage. You can buy it from Bodan if you have the Collector's Edition, or if you have a mod that adds the Collector's Edition items to the game. This staff has the highest spell power bonus and damage, but it has a bonus to fire damage, so you may prefer to equip it on a mage who uses fire spells. Magister's Staff is a tier 6 staff with plus 1 combat mana regen, plus 5 spell power, and plus 10% spirit damage. You can obtain it by killing Zathrian if you side with the werewolves during Nature of the Beast, or if you decide to turn on him after killing the werewolves. Shaper's Blessing is a tier 6 cold staff with plus 2 willpower, plus 0.5 combat mana regen, and plus 10% cold damage. It's a quest reward for a mage warden for completing the side quest The Shaper's Life in Orzammar. The quest is bugged to not give you any reward in the base game, but works properly if you have Quinn's Fixback. Staff of the Magister Lord is a tier 7 cold staff with plus 6 willpower, plus 2 combat mana regen, plus 6 spell power, and plus 10% fire and spirit damage. You can buy it from the Circle Tower Quartermaster for almost 129 gold. Winter's Breath is a tier 7 cold staff with plus 25% cold resistance, plus 3 spell power, and plus 10% cold damage. You can buy it from the Wonders of Thedas in Denrim for a bit over 31 gold. Here are the best robes. Tevinter Mage robes are robes with plus 1 combat mana regen, plus 4% spell resistance, and plus 5 spell power. You can buy them from the Wonders of Thedas in Denrim. First Enchanter robes are robes with plus 3 willpower and magic and plus 9 defense. You can buy them from Caesar's special stock in Denrim after completing the Trial of Crows questline. Vestments of the Seer are robes with plus 9 willpower, plus 6 magic, plus 10 armor, and plus 12% spell resistance. They are DLC related and will be in your inventory from the start if you completed the Witch Hunt DLC. The vestments are the best option since they offer the highest spell power and mana, but if you don't have them or don't want to use them because they're a DLC item, the Tevinter Mage robes have the highest spell power in the base game. If you're using the Circle Traveling Robes mod, instead of the First Enchanter robes you may be able to find or buy one of the Traveling robes with similar stats. They just have higher defense and some missile deflection. Moving on to helmets. The cloth helmets for mages are overall weak, not to mention ugly. There's only a couple that are somewhat useful for the build. Reinforced Magus Cowl is a cloth helmet with plus 2 willpower, plus 20 mental resistance, and minus 1 dexterity. You can buy it from the Circle Tower Quartermaster. Plus 10 mana is not that great, so I don't think it's worth buying this, but it's an option. Finally, the Libertarian's Cowl grants plus 12 defense and plus 0.25 combat mana regen. You can loot it from a corpse in the Circle Tower's Templar quarters during the Mage main quest. In essence, these helmets are just giving you a bit of extra mana or mana regen in the case of the last one. If you think they're hideous, it's totally fine to skip them or wear a helmet with a strength requirement instead due to being an arcane warrior. I personally think that a mage with robes and a big metal helmet looks goofy, but hey, maybe you like that. Executioner's Helm is a variable tier heavy helmet with plus 25 stamina. You can obtain it as random loot from various places or buy it from Caesar's special stock in Denrim. The stamina gets converted to mana, so that's a pretty decent bonus. Helm of Honleith is a tier 2 heavy helmet with plus 2 to all attributes and plus 3 armor. You can loot it from Honleith as part of the Stone Prisoner DLC. Bonuses to all attributes are great of course, but this is a very overpowered DLC item, so I don't recommend using it. Moving on to gloves. The only ones that are useful grant cold or spirit damage bonuses. There are 2 of each element, one that grants plus 10% and one that grants plus 20%. The elemental damage bonus cap is plus 30%, so you may not need the 20% gloves to get up to that. Ashen gloves are mage gloves with plus 20% cold damage. You can loot them from the Arcane Horror in the lower Brazilian ruins during Nature of the Beast. Black Hand Gauntlets are mage gloves with plus 20% spirit damage. You can loot them from a Malefic card during the Mage's Collective side quest, Thy Brother's Killer, in the East Bristolian Forest. Polar Gauntlets are mage gloves with plus 10% cold damage. You can buy them from the Circle Tower Quartermaster. Spirit Hands are mage gloves with plus 10% spirit damage. You can buy them from Bodan in the party camp. Finally, in terms of boots, I've already explained that there aren't any which grant you offensive bonuses. So the starting Fade Striders, which you find during the Circle Mage origin, are the best, since you at least get plus 1 spell power from them. If you don't have them, you can use any defensive boots, go barefoot, or else use a higher value defensive option from the heavy or massive boots that you can equip as an Arcane Warrior. Boots of Diligence are tier 6 heavy boots with plus 6 defense and plus 2 armor. You can buy them from Owen in Redcliffe if he survives the events of the undead attack and you save his daughter from the castle. Kaelin's Greaves are tier 5 to 7 massive boots with plus 1 armor and plus 20% dodge chance. You can obtain them during the Return to Ostagar DLC. I recommend equipping a tank or melee character with these instead because the dodge chance isn't that important on your mage. Moving on to accessories. The best belt for any mage is the Sash of Forbidden Secrets, which grants plus 6 willpower, plus 6 spell power, plus 15 mental resistance, and improves blood magic. You can have it in your inventory from the beginning of the game if you kill the Harvester in the Golems of Amgarak DLC. But this is such an overpowered item that it takes away the challenge of the game, and I personally don't use it outside of some special playthroughs. If you don't want to use the Sash, or don't have it, here are 2 good base game belts. Belt of the Magister Lords grants plus 3 spell power, and you can loot it from the corpse of an adventurer at the end of the Gauntlet during the Urn of Sacred Ashes main quest. Destructionist's Belt is a mage-restricted belt with plus 0.5 combat mana regen and plus 3 spell power. You can buy it from Ruck and Ortan Taig in the Deep Roads. Moving on to Amulets. Life Drinker is a blood mage-restricted amulet with plus 4 spell power. You can loot it from a Dragon Egg in the Mountainside Caverns during the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest. If you care about the extra spell power, you can choose Blood Mage as your second specialization to be able to equip this. However, if you're roleplaying a character who is against blood magic and don't want to unlock the specialization, here are 2 other good amulets. Pearl of the Anointed grants plus 1 to all attributes. It's a DLC item which should be in your inventory from the beginning of the game. Heart of Witherfang grants plus 1 strength, plus 1 magic, and plus 50% nature resistance. It's a quest reward from the main quest Nature of the Beast if you side with the elves and kill the werewolves. Finally, here are the good rings. There aren't any amazing ones, but you can get some decent bonuses. Key to the City is a ring with plus 2 to all attributes, plus 4% spell resistance, and plus 10% to healing effects received. You can obtain it by completing the secret side quest The Key to the City in Orzammar by picking up some codex entries around the city. Bonuses to all attributes are usually better on melee characters since they get more out of all the stats, but if you want to use this on your Ice Mage, the magic and willpower you get from this are nice. Frost Cheer is a ring with plus 10% cold damage. You can loot it from Tornos the Deserter in the Frostback Mountain Pass as part of the Dereliction of Duty side quest for the Blackstone Irregulars. Dreamsever grants plus 10% spirit damage. You can loot it from the Mad Hermit if you kill him in the East Brazilian Forest. Morrigan's Ring is a ring with plus 2 willpower. You can obtain it if your Guy Warden romances Morrigan and accepts it as a gift. Side note, I wish Morrigan gave this as a gift to a friend she loves too. This is just plus 10 mana, but if you don't need the elemental damage bonuses, it's okay. The Lucky Stone is a ring with plus 1 to all attributes. It's a promo DLC item you should have in your inventory from the start. Same thing here, it's decent, so you can equip it if you don't want the elemental damage rings. Moving on to tactics and party composition. In terms of party composition, my general recommendations will always stay the same. 1 tank, 1 mage, and at least 1 ranged character, whether archer or mage. By tank, I mean a character who can draw enemy aggression away from their squisher allies. Normally, this is a warrior who can use Threaten and Taunt to generate threat, though an Arcane Warrior Mage can also act as an effective tank as long as they generate enough threat with their spells. Mages are always useful, no matter your party composition, whether for damage, healing, buffs, debuffs, and disabling effects. They're super versatile and powerful, and even this build that is ostensibly a cold damage mage actually does so much more through debuffing and disabling enemies. You can absolutely have a second or even third mage in the party. I'd recommend a mage who deals some of the damage types that you don't, in particular fire, which is extra effective against Darkspawn and Undead. You could also have a dedicated healer and buff mage so that your Ice Mage mostly focuses on damage, debuffs, and disabling effects. As for having a ranged character, it's mostly due to the fact that if you have a full melee party, your characters will get stuck in corridors and other cramped spaces, trying to maneuver around each other instead of attacking enemies. It's pretty annoying, and you can avoid this positioning problem by having a mixed range party with at least 1 ranged character, if not 2. Your Ice Mage is a ranged character, so you could add 3 melee characters to the rest of your party, mainly to take advantage of the weapon enchantment spells, which only apply to melee characters, but I personally usually like to have a balanced mix of 2 melee and 2 ranged. However, this is all the advice I have for party compositions. Ultimately, it's up to you who you choose to bring along because you should have a party you feel comfortable playing, and which includes the companions you like. My recommendations are just suggestions based on my experience and playstyle preferences, so don't take them as rules. Especially if you're playing on easy or normal, pretty much anything can work as long as you don't accidentally go into the deep roads at level 10. For your Ice Mage's tactics, the main focus of this build is freezing and slowing enemies with ice spells and disabling them with other similar spells such as Glyph of Paralysis, Paralyze, or Crushing Prison. The damage you deal is secondary, though it can still be very good, other than when you're fighting undead, which are highly resistant or immune to cold damage. First up, the sustained abilities. There's a few options here on which ones to use, though the most important one is combat magic. Combat magic should be active at all times once you've upgraded it with Aura of Might for the +5 damage and +10 defense. Don't use it before upgrading it because attack bonuses do nothing for your staff attacks. Frost weapons and telekinetic weapons are weapon enchantment spells that buff the melee characters in your party, including Shell and the dog. Frost weapons adds cold damage to their attacks, whereas telekinetic weapons increases their armor penetration. Generally, Frost weapons is the superior choice since armor penetration isn't very good due to most enemies having low armor scores. But when you're fighting undead who are highly resistant to cold damage or some which are immune, then it's best to turn off frost weapons. You don't have to use telekinetic weapons instead, but it's a nice option to have for highly armored enemies like bosses. Spell Wisp is cheap to sustain and grants a good buff to your spell power, especially later once you have a higher base spell power plus bonuses on gear, so you should keep it sustained at all times. Arcane Shield and Rock Armor are decent defensive options for when you want to get closer to enemies to use Cone of Cold or Mind Blast. Rock Armor is the better one to use. Armor reduces all physical damage you take, whereas defense just slightly decreases the enemy's chance to hit you with an attack. While you also have a defense bonus from combat magic, your defense overall still won't be that high, so if you're only keeping one of these two sustained, go for Rock Armor. Miasma is an optional sustained spell you can use if you find that you often have enemies around you in the area of effect, because it will reduce their attack and defense by 10, and also have a chance to slow their movement speed. If you don't really have enemies close by, you can turn this off, so it doesn't keep some of your maximum mana locked away. In terms of activated spells, you have a few categories: single target damage, AoE damage, debuffs, disabling effects, and utility. For single target damage, you have 3 spells of different elements: Winter's Grasp, Stonefist, and Arcane Bolt. Winter's Grasp deals cold damage and more importantly has a chance to freeze enemies. In the base game, the freeze effect from Winter's Grasp doesn't allow the shatter combo to be applied, but if you have Dane's fixes, one of the tweaks makes it so that you can shatter enemies frozen by it. Since only elite and lower rank enemies can be shattered anyway, I think it makes perfect sense for Winter's Grasp to allow setting up a shatter combo. Shattering an enemy can be done if you either use Stonefist or deal a critical strike on them while they are frozen or petrified. This is why this build has Stonefist, and I also recommend having auto-crit abilities on your allies, which will make it easier for you to shatter enemies. Stonefist deals physical damage to a target and has a chance to knock it down, but you mainly want to use this for the shatter effect on an enemy frozen by your ice magic. The physical damage is decent, plus the chance to temporarily disable an enemy is always useful, but shattering is thematically relevant to the build. Arcane Bolt deals spirit damage to a target at a very long range. While it doesn't really have anything to do with ice, it's a solid spell to have unlocked on any mage, and it frankly looks like a slightly souped up staff projectile, so it doesn't look out of place. If you don't want to use it because it doesn't fit the theme, feel free to ignore it, but this is a great source of damage if your ice spells are on cooldown, and it's extremely cheap to cast. For AoE damage, you have Cone of Cold and Blizzard. Cone of Cold deals cold damage in a cone in front of the mage, and more importantly, freezes all the characters in the area. Friendly fire is possible, so be careful when you cast this and try to avoid your allies if you can. But sometimes it's going to be absolutely worth to cast this, even if one or more of your party members are frozen, just because freezing a group of enemies at once is extremely powerful. I recommend using this against dangerous groups of melee enemies, such as werewolves, deepstalkers, or spiders, but you can of course also use it to freeze bosses and elites. This is an incredibly useful spell to have during the Arl of Redcliffe and Nature of the Beast. There are certain corridors where a bunch of enemies will rush towards you, and if you catch them right at the doorway, you'll freeze all of them and make it much easier to win the fight. Blizzard deals cold damage every 2 seconds for its 30-second duration, but of course the potential freeze, slip effects, and debuffs are more important than the damage itself. Importantly, your allies will not be frozen by this even if they fail the physical resistance check, they'll just be slowed down instead. They can still slip and fall though. I wouldn't recommend using this often if you have a lot of melee characters in your party, because the debuffs you impose on them and their chance to slip will greatly reduce their effectiveness in combat. If you have a two-handed warrior immune to slip due to using Indomitable, that warrior won't be affected as much by Blizzard, so you can use it even if they're in the AoE. As a bonus, two-handed warriors also have 2 auto-crit abilities which combine perfectly with the freeze effects of Blizzard to shatter enemies. One interesting spell combination you may want to experiment with is Storm of the Century. It requires Blizzard and Tempest to be cast on top of each other, with one of the mages casting one or both of these spells to have Spell Might active. This combo causes the Blizzards and Tempest in the area to be cancelled, and for the Storm of the Century spell to deal electricity damage instead, making essentially a buffed version of Tempest. If you're casting this with two mages, the mage casting the second spell needs to have Spell Might active, otherwise it won't work. The mage with Spell Might will also have 100 mana drained from them when they cast the second spell. The radius of Storm of the Century is double that of either of Blizzard and Tempest, so make sure your allies are out of its range unless you can heal them, because this spell combo deals a lot of damage. I generally recommend casting Blizzard first to freeze the enemies in place or slow them down, and then cast Tempest with your second mage. Obviously, this Ice Mage build doesn't have Tempest or Spell Might, but if you want to try this combo, you can unlock these spells on a second mage. It's a very cool looking ability, but it takes a while to cast both of its components, and is pretty dangerous for your allies. Still, because it's such a unique and cool combination, I had to mention it here as a possibility. This is actually amazing to use during the final battle against the Darkspawn, because it will easily destroy entire armies of them in Denrim on its own. You can just keep your party members back while your mages cast this and watch the carnage. For debuffs, the only activated spell is Weakness, but as I said earlier, the debuff to attack, defense, and potential movement speed is too small, and it only applies to one enemy. The Miasma Sustain is far better because it applies that debuff to all enemies in the area of effect, and you don't have to manually spend mana to cast it multiple times on different enemies. You can use this early on to target physical elites, such as Ogres and Darkspawn alphas, but once you reach the mid-game, this is kind of useless. For disabling effect, you have Paralyze, Glyph of Paralysis, Crushing Prison, Mind Blast, your cold spells, as well as optionally Mass Paralysis. Technically, Force Field is also a disabling spell because it immobilizes the target, but I'll talk about it in the utility spell section. The main point of these disabling spells is that they slow down or stop enemies from moving and attacking entirely, so that they are easier to kill and so that they no longer pose a danger to your party with their attacks and abilities. The highest priority targets for disabling effects are always enemy spellcasters, because they can wreck you with their spells if you don't deal with them early. After that, elites and bosses are very good targets to disable because they deal higher amounts of damage. Finally, if you have an AoE disabling spell like Glyph of Paralysis, Mind Blast, Cone of Cold, or Mass Paralysis, you can also use those on a larger group of enemies, even if they are lower rank and there aren't any mages among them. Even if each enemy separately isn't that powerful, there is such a thing as a numbers advantage. You can still get killed by a large group of normal rank archers, for example, like in the fight against Sir Cothrian. Finally, let's talk about utility spells: Force Field, Heal, and optionally Group Heal and Revival. Force Field is the most interesting spell because it can be used both defensively and offensively. I prefer to mostly use it as a way to keep one of my allies from getting killed. There are certain enemy abilities in the game that can't be avoided. Grabs by ogres, the overwhelm ability of canines, giant spiders, deep stalkers, and werewolves, and the bite and wave around ability of the dragon. If one of your allies gets targeted by one of these abilities, it's possible they will not survive to damage, so you can cast Force Field to make them immune to damage. You can also try to heal them through it with Heal and Group Heal, but that might not be enough. This is also the best way to counter the spell Curse of Mortality other than a Dispel effect, because the curse makes the target unable to heal while continuously taking spared damage. If you make them immune with Force Field, the curse's duration will expire, and afterwards the character will be able to heal again. The best way to use Force Field offensively is if you have a dangerous character you can't kill quickly, usually a boss rank enemy, or an elite mage protected by non-mage characters or creatures. Cast Force Field on the troublesome enemy to remove it from the battle, kill all of the weaker enemies around it, and then you can focus all your attention on the main enemy. In particular, this is great when you're fighting a boss mage like Zathrian or Caladrius, or the Blood Mage leader in the Deserted Building. For Heal and Group Heal, you use them to keep your party alive by restoring their HP when it gets low. I recommend casting Heal if an ally is under 50% HP or 60% if playing on Hard or Nightmare. Use Group Heal either if multiple allies are injured or if one ally is under 30% HP, because usually that means some of the other party members will also need a little healing. Revival is manually used on an unconscious party member to bring them back into the fight. Heal them with a spell or poultice after reviving them, since they will be low health, and keep in mind they'll also have an injury from being knocked unconscious that needs to be cured. An interesting fact about Revival is that it actually has a small area of effect, so if multiple party members died close to each other, you can revive all of them at once. I haven't really had this happen other than maybe once or twice in the entire 16 years that I've played Origins, but it may be helpful to know this. In conclusion, the Ice Mage build is a very versatile mixed build that deals damage, buffs the mage, heals allies, and debuffs and disables enemies. This makes for a far more comfortable play experience compared to the more specialized builds. This particular build has a lot of possibilities for combinations with other party members, the Shatter combo that destroys frozen enemies with Stonefists or crits, or Storm of the Century, which can wreck entire groups of enemies on its own. Even without the official spell combos, disabling enemies is always an amazing thing that will make killing enemies a lot easier. While it's not a high damage mage due to focusing on cold damage instead of fire and spirit or lightning, it still has so much power through its disabling effects. So if you haven't tried a build like this before, I highly recommend it. Anyway, this has been my build guide for an Ice Mage in Dragon Age Origins. I hope you found this interesting and useful, and do let me know if you try out the build if you found it fun to play. For my testing, it was a lot of fun and relaxing due to all the CC. If you have any more requests for thematic builds in Origins, let me know and I'll come up with something. I love making interesting non-meta builds, so thank you very much to purplevaporgod for this request. Hope you like the build. I'd like to say a special thank you to my members. I appreciate all of you so much. If you enjoy my content, please remember to subscribe. It really helps the channel a lot, even if you don't look at your subscription feed. Becoming a member would of course help even more, but only do it if you actually want to and can afford it. I always appreciate it, even if you just like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a kind comment. This has been B-Tier Mutineer. I wish you a happy rest of your day or evening. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.